So today our topic of discussion is 5 things you should never do in your new job. So the idea behind this came from reflecting on some of the lessons that I've come across, some painful experiences that some friends and colleagues have gone through. And I thought it's wonderful to share these because going into your career, starting right from campus or early on in your career, it's very easy to make some of these mistakes and to be completely oblivious of the impact they can have on you. So the topic for today is 5 things you should never do in your new job. And it may be the case that you'll join a company or you'll join um, a group where some of these practices are normal, but it doesn't mean that they are accepted because it's very easy for maybe management could change and suddenly they begin to take the policies or the rules of working in that environment very seriously. And you could find yourself in a lot of trouble because you've just developed a habit of breaking these rules. So we're going to talk about 5 things you should never do in your new job. So um, I'll just start off briefly with a short introduction, and I'm going to go through the 5 points. At some point, we'll have some interactive session, and we'll have just help me to also get a feel of where you are and in your career in terms of also what you're interested in. So let's start off with a bit of an introduction. My name is Paul, and I am I have had quite a mixed career, moving through a number of roles. Currently, I work in what is called data science, and that's quite a loaded term. Uh, Data science is sort of like the evolution of statistics, but integrating a lot more computational approaches in terms of retrieving data, structuring data, storing data, and managing data through its life cycle. So it's not just like traditional statistics where you are given data and you have to extract some meaning or information from that data. Data science is now more hands-on, and I'd love to at some point go through a few topics in data science. So if that's something you'd be interested, so feel free, let me know. But previously, I worked in scientific software development. I found that an extremely satisfying job, and because it married the two sides of science and software development. And I've done this, I mean, in various roles for about 14 years now. So I've been very fortunate to go through a number of different transitions or different responsibilities. I've worked in telecommunications. I worked in 2 telecom companies in Kenya, and had some very interesting experiences. In fact, working in one particular case where a new mobile network was coming online, and we were involved in in putting in place the core network components of that. And then I switched completely, and I'll tell you a little bit about my education in a bit, but I ended up in bioinformatics. This was almost like completely by accident. It wasn't planned at all. Again, maybe one day I can go into the process of how that did unfold. And that then became the genesis of my work in data science. And then I ended up, once I was in data science and in bioinformatics, it was very easy to make the transition into software development because by that time I had worked a lot with some of the tools that you see on your screen. Some of them are very keen about. I'd love to continue working with them. And I know that these are sort of the technologies that sort of form the benchmark of getting into a career in software or in data. And it's really important to develop these skills. So in terms of my education, I have an electrical engineering degree from University of Nairobi. And then I went on to do a postgrad diploma in mathematical science. That was such a deep experience. I really loved every moment of that. And that then led me to do my final degree in computational biology. So that's a little bit about me. I'm very passionate about technical stuff, as well as teaching technical stuff. And that's what I want to do more of into the future. And parts of my current responsibility involve not teaching per se, but organizing teaching. So it's something that I'm very passionate about, something I'm very keen on, and I'd love to do more and more, given that I feel like Africa is at a position where it it needs to, develop a lot of these skills. And that really brings me to the point of why did I set up this series of talks? What's the point behind this? I mean, I could be doing other things with my time. Well, I see a very bright future for Africa ahead. And the way I want to participate in this is I'd love to mentor and, guide young people with some of the tools and tips that I wish I received when I was developing in my early years after my education. So I think the right mindset to have when it comes to thinking about your career is to think of yourself as a seedling. You've been in a very protected environment throughout your studies, and for the most part, you have been told what to do. The initiative has always been external. Someone else has decided what you should do. You've been working according to timetables, you've been preparing for exams. And all of a sudden, once you finished especially when you finish your first degree, it's the first opportunity you have to go out in the world and begin to do things on your own. And you're still, to be honest, you're still very tender, very young, very undeveloped. In as much as you may have learned a lot of stuff, it's all been theoretical. And now you really want to step out into the real world and put this into practice. So I think that the right way to think about this is that, yes, you're quite green and you're quite tender and you're quite flexible and pliable. And what you're really trying to do is you want to get to the point where you are mature and established and you're rooted and you're beginning to bear fruit and you're beginning to have an impact in the world, a positive impact in the world. And so the question here is $1 million question. How do you go from that initial situation where you are quite young and undeveloped to become mature, and where you're then beginning to think of giving back or contributing to the next generation, which is what I'm trying to do. So what does it take to make this transition? What does it take to move from your early career when you're still fresh and green to the point where you are now established and you're a part of the economy and you're contributing in significant ways? Well, there's a number of things that are really important. One of them is you really need to be patient because that growth comes about very slowly, and you're building skills, you're developing new habits, you're flexing your muscles. It also requires a lot of diligence. It needs you to be disciplined and bringing yourself to work every day. And that's just a very important part of that kind of success. You need to learn a lot of new things. In as much as you've been in school and you've been a student and you've been, developing your skill, you still have a long way to go in terms of your learning, so much more to learn. And now you're beginning to learn things which are part and parcel of industry and how industry does things. It also needs a lot of humility. You may have been the top student in your class, or one of the top students in your class, and it's easy to think that because you're a really good student and you're really bright and you've accomplished a lot academically, that the real world is going to recognize that. And the truth of the matter is that you know absolutely nothing about what it means to work in a working environment. And therefore, you're starting from scratch. It's great that you have this technical background or this learning background that you've developed, but there's just so much more to learn. And there's many other things. I could go on, but there's one thing I really want to highlight and bring to your attention, which you may never have considered or thought is instrumental to your growth and maturity, and that is luck. And it sounds completely absurd, but the truth of the matter is you're going to rely on a number of breaks, and these breaks are completely unpredictable. How you're going to decide to go for a certain, um, um, you know, further studies, that is completely out of your control. How you're going to land a certain job, again, that's completely out of your control. The rate at which or new jobs become available is completely out of your control. The kind of people you're going to meet in your working environment, you may meet some really good people, you may meet some really nasty people who force you to then maybe look for other opportunities. Again, that is completely luck. So luck plays a huge part, and you can't predict that luck. But as one of the authors who I've really enjoyed reading is a guy called Daniel Priestley says, is you can engineer luck. You can prepare yourself for luck by reading the right kind of books, being in the right kind of places, learning the right kind of things. And that's what it takes to actually go. If you look at a lot of people, successful people, career, you'll see that the transitions that they make are completely unplanned and heavily depend on luck. So I wouldn't say that you should have luck 100%. You really have to have your patience and diligence and learning and humility and all those other very important skills. But then luck is going to feature a lot of places in your life, and you just have to show up prepared, and that's what you need to do. I believe that the future is Africa, and for a number of reasons. One is Africa is where we have got the highest population growth, which to me is very exciting. That means that the future of humanity will be centered in Africa. Africa is predominantly young, and it's got a lot of resources, and the key resource in Africa is people. Like, we can think that it's valuable to have gold and oil and all these natural resources or a great climate and so on, but there's nothing more important than the people. And how do we know this? You look at a country like Japan, which has virtually no natural resources, but by diligence and hard work, they have become a center for industry because of the people. It's the people who assign value to natural resources. And one book that I read, the author talked about how what used to happen in Japan is they would import scrap metal and export manufactured products like microphones using that the scrap metal which has been recycled because of their ingenuity. It is ingenuity that makes the difference, and you only get that ingenuity. Well, you could get that with AI now, but it's primarily people. It's people who really, really count. So if you look at this picture on the screen, this is an image of, the late 19th century in the US. And you can see this is a very early stages of the development of a town, and you can see how it was structured. It wasn't like most modern towns look like. But you can see sort of the infrastructure. These are telegraph wires that you see uh, lining up here. And as you can see, you could probably see people riding horses right here in the middle. I can see someone in a bicycle. I think bicycles have already been developed. And you have shops, but you have people, carrying out various trades. But that's exactly the same thing you see in Africa. Africa is still very young. You've got people plying trades along the road. You've got these lines here of electricity and telephone lines. So there is sort of the same technology, and Africa is very young, and this is why I'm still very optimistic about Africa. It's got tons of young people, but you don't see any horses. What you see instead is people riding motorbikes. So in the early days, people would be riding their horses, and they had to maintain them. But nowadays in Africa, we ride these motorcycles. This is a very affordable means of transport. Of course, you still see the bicycle, just like you saw before. But Africa is the future. If you're in Africa, then you are in the right place. If you're an African, then you are the right generation, and the future is just waiting for you. So I'm glad that you're joining this talk so that you can learn what we can, share together. So the first thing I want us to do before we get into a lot of, I go into the 5 things you shouldn't do, is to start off with a little bit of an interaction. And so what I'd love you to try out, you can use a QR code on the screen. And here's a question I'd like you to answer. In 20 years, what one word would you like to best describe you? So I'd like you to go to menti.com or use a QR code on your screen. I will also, do this. What one word would you like to describe you? How would you want to be described? Now, you'll have an option of 3 words there, but just load that on your phone or on your laptop or whatever you're using. Go to menti.com and enter that code 89002544. What one word would you like to best describe you in 20 years? So 20 years into the future, what would you like to be known for? Just one word. I'll just give you a minute to fill that in. Give me a thumbs up if you've successfully accessed that. Okay, I like that disruptor. I love that. Okay, great. Okay, let's go to the next one. Now, in this next task, we have a grid here, and on the grid, you have got there are 4 items in the grid, and the bottom axis relates to skill. On the left is low skill, and the right is high skill. And for the vertical axis, we've got experience, we've got low experience and high experience. So you can think of each of these as having a combination of, for example, at the top left, you'd have low skill and high experience, high skill and high experience, and so on and so forth. So what I'd like you to try and do is once you've run the first one, so now try and fill in for each of these topics, subject matter expertise. Where do you fall in right now? Where would you locate yourself in terms of skill and experience? So in terms of subject matter expertise, and then in terms of professionalism, and then in terms of attitude, I think I have a lot to grow there. And in terms of people skills, that's a tricky one. We tend to, okay, great. Okay, so we have a couple of points here. So in terms of subject matter expertise, okay, and in terms of attitude, and in terms of professionalism, okay, that's great. That's very helpful. Okay, thanks for that. Now, as a fresh graduate, and I mentioned it in the last talk, what are the advantages of being a fresh graduate? And it's easy to think of it as just because you're a fresh graduate, you have a lot of disadvantages, and it's not the case. Like, being fresh means that there are certain things that are going well for you. One is you're not biased in terms of how you work and how you integrate in the company. You're very open to learn. And as long as you have the right attitude, and these are some of the things we'll talk about today, but you don't have a bias in terms, you've never worked anywhere else before. And if you have, you've worked as an intern, you're sort of an outsider, you hadn't really integrated, and then you had to go back to school. And the dominant culture that shaped how you interact with the world was your undergraduate culture, your culture among your classmates. The other thing that I think is really, really good for being a fresh graduate is you've just done tons of exams and you've come out in the world, but you're still fresh in terms of what you've learned. As long as of course, you are paying attention in class and you're really trying to understand, your learning capacity is really at its peak. And the third, which I think sounds a bit negative, but it's not really negative, is you're cheap and that people are willing to try things out with you. Once you've been in the working environment for a long time and your expectations and needs keep on rising, then people don't want to take a risk with you because you're quite an expensive investment. But when you're fresh, you're cheap, and people could try things out with you, and it's easy for them to buy you or at least absorb the cost of all the mistakes that you make. So that's really what is going for you, and don't think of this as a disadvantage. And the way you take advantage of this is really to try things out. If you put too much pressure on yourself and expect that you're going to get, your first job will be one where you're earning a lot of money, and you unnecessarily put for yourself a barrier. What you really need is to get out there, get a job where you're part of a team and you're part of contributing towards some, production process as soon as you can. That's really very important. Even if they're not paying you well, even if you're having to depend on yourself, it's much better to be part of that experience, because that gives you credibility that you are hireable. Now, so try and get something, anything that you can begin to contribute to, and that's really going to take you very far. So now let's start off with the first of the five. And this, I find this is the behavior or the habit or the don't do that I find a lot of young people need to be taught this, and it's easy to ignore it. And you'll find that you'll get into a work environment where people generally will ignore this. But it's one of those things that a company could suddenly decide that they're going to take seriously. Don't mix company resources with personal use. I cannot stress this enough. And in fact, I have an interesting story that I'm going to tell you about this. When it comes to company resources, it's always good to have a very clear boundary. And always bear in mind that if it's not yours, never, ever treat it like it is. It's not for you to use and play around with. It belongs to the company. And there are usually very strong implications of what company property, how using company property will affect you. And why is this important? Well, it's important for a number of things. One is it's a way to signal how you're able to distinguish between what belongs to the company, which the company has invested in, and what belongs to you. And if you don't do that, it begins to erode trust. It begins to convey to other people that you don't care about what the company owns, because the company is spending money to have those assets. It also violates policies. There are a number of policies that companies will usually outline that say, you have to read this policy, you have to understand this policy. And if you don't, that can get you into a lot of trouble. And as I said, there a lot of people will ignore this, and you'll find people doing all sorts of things with company property. But the day that they decide to take it seriously, or the day that something goes wrong and they do an investigation and it's found out that you put personal information on a company laptop, then you could get into a lot of trouble. It could get you flagged, and it could get you fired. And I have a true story here. It's a story about a friend of mine and who got a job in a very prestigious company, and he was working. He really enjoyed his work. He was doing really well, but I don't know why he decided to do this. Why he decided to violate the company policy. But because this was at the time when internet wasn't that available outside of work. So people would mostly access internet from their companies. And so what he did was he decided to go onto some torrent website, and he downloaded a movie. But he was using the company resources, using the company laptop. He was on the company network. And I'm sure that he had been warned. I'm sure that he had been told that there are certain rules, that there are certain things you shouldn't do. But he did that all the same. Now, it turns out that the owners of that content, one of the major producers of movies, decided to try and follow up and find out who had downloaded this content. And it turned out that they found that the IP address was owned by the company. The company did an investigation and found out that he is the one who had downloaded the content, and he was fired. Now, I don't doubt that there were other people who were doing this in the office. They probably had come up with smart ways to do this. But the fact that he had decided, he was part and parcel of this. I don't know if anyone else was fired. I know that he was fired. So he lost a massive opportunity in a great company, and he obviously got a really horrible reputation because of that. So there are companies that do care about their intellectual property. They will follow up, and you will be on the receiving end. A lot of companies have in place technology that can track everything you do on the company network. So take it from me, these are things that actually do happen. You need to have clear boundaries. on how you use company property, because it does show professionalism. You know, if you have personal emails, if you use your company email to send personal emails, to be part of forums and to log on to all sorts of things that are unprofessional, then you could end up in a lot of trouble. So it goes without saying, you should never, ever use your company resources for personal tasks. You should have your own private laptop, your own private internet connection when you need to, your own private email. Keep them completely separate. And I know that a lot of people, maybe the email service provided by your employer is not the best, but still you could get into a lot of trouble because of that. So here are some of the examples of how you shouldn't abuse company resources. Well, one is using the company Wi-Fi, office Wi-Fi, to binge watch Netflix. Now, you can think of someone who's maybe in a network operating center where they are working through the night. They typically don't have a lot of work, and they to burn the time, to kill the hours, they decide to watch Netflix on the company network, on the company Wi-Fi. That could get you into a lot of trouble. What you'd much rather do is sign up for some online learning with your employer and, you know, kill the time with that, or have a book, something on the side. And it may be the case that you're not supposed to be distracted when you're in a network operating center. So don't do this. It's very tempting, but don't do this. Another thing that people do is abusing the company printer, you know, printing massive number of pages from the company printer because you're doing an MBA and they require copies. Just pay for it yourself. It's not worth the risk. It really isn't worth the risk. Running a side hustle using your work laptop, you're building, you know, websites for other people using your company laptop because your company laptop is powerful enough, it's got enough RAM, enough memory. Don't do this. Buy your own laptop, buy your own desktop, do the work on those. Don't mix at all. Or taking long personal calls during working hours. This is a big no-no. You should use working time for working time. Get to work on time, leave work at the right time, and just don't mix your work with your personal stuff. Some other tips on how to navigate the use of company resources. If you really need to use a resource, you can always ask. You can always find out and say, I'd love to use this. I need to, for example, you know, do a passport application. I'm in the office and I don't have any other time. Is it okay if I used, you know, went on to eCitizen or any other government website or applied for a visa? Let's say you're going on holiday. You can always ask and you know, find out at least. We'd rather be awkward in asking than be awkward in being fired. Yes, as I've said, try and have your own tools for your personal stuff. Keep them separate. And one of the things that I did one of the organizations I worked at, they gave us the opportunity to have a license for JetBrains. Now, if you know JetBrains is an integrated development environment, and they had a license to use absolutely everything available on JetBrains, because typically you'd have to get a license for each. And I thought to myself, if I did use, because at the time I was only working with, I was doing web development in Python, and therefore PyCharm was sufficient for that. But I knew that I couldn't afford to have JetBrains on my own. Like, it's quite an expensive license and you pay every year. But I could afford to get PyCharm. So what I did was I said, okay, look, I'll just use PyCharm at work so that I can get used to working with PyCharm. Because once I leave this organization and I have to buy for myself a license, and because I want to continue writing code, then I can at least afford to use that. So if I get used to using the more expensive license and then I leave work and now have, you know, I'm used to working with that, but I can't afford it, that's going to give me a bit of angst. And so what you could do is find open source alternatives for your personal work, because there are tons of tools out there that you could actually use. When in doubt, use your own data or device or your time. If you're ever in doubt, don't assume. And in some of the certain disciplines, your employer actually owns everything you do, even on your private time. And you see this a lot in software, where even on weekends, if you have your side hustle where you're writing your own code, they own that code because the license, the way your contract is structured is anything you develop in the course of your employment belongs to them because it could be inspired by the work that you've seen at the office. It's very hard to say that whatever you did during work has no relationship to what you're doing in your personal time. Well, what software companies will say is anything and everything you do, even on weekends, even on holiday, even with your own laptop, that belongs to them because they own all your productive output because you're working in that space. So if when you're in doubt, then you need to check your contract before you sign your contract. Make sure you understand what the terms of that contract are. And that's when it comes to company policies. When you get a job, when you're hired, you'll always be given like the staff handbook, which has all the rules. And once you join the company, there will be more company policies. You need to read those policies very carefully and understand exactly what is expected of you. And that would include things like an intellectual property policy. Who owns the work that you create? And you need to be very clear. And 99% of companies will say everything you develop during your work belongs to them. In some cases, they'll make a distinction between work that is done in the domain of your company. So, for example, if you're working in telecommunications, anything you do in telecommunications, they're going to own it outright. But if you're in a telecommunications company and then you come up with write a storybook for kids, which is completely unrelated, then it's very unlikely that they would chase you up for that. But it's just good to understand this very carefully. In a lot of cases, they'll want you to make a disclosure before you proceed. And it's better to have that upfront. There are also rules about professional conduct, how you should conduct yourself, and working hours. Like if they stipulate that working hours are from 8 to, let's say, 5, and they say anything done in working hours belongs to them, then that means even if let's say you're on sick leave for 3 days and you came up with a brilliant idea when you're at home, but it was within working hours, then that could still count as belonging to them. So just be clear about what the rules say with regards to use of company resources. That's very, very important. So the second thing that I think is very important you should never, ever do is don't act like you know everything. And it may sound kind of obvious, but I can assure you, you've just finished your degree, you are the top of your class, one of the top in your class, and everyone is excited about, what you're going to accomplish. But the truth of the matter is you know zero about the new workplace and you're starting from scratch. So if you come in thinking like you're the hottest thing in sliced bread, then it's important to really leave that at the door before you start. It's good to have confidence. Overconfidence is bad. Arrogance is a liability. And arrogance really means to claim things to yourself that you really don't have. So you may be familiar with a lot of things because you've seen them in the textbooks, just because before you graduated. And therefore you think that, you're going to understand things, you're going to be much better than anyone else. And work experience does count a lot towards sharpening you. So it's good to go in with a hungry attitude, ready to learn, that's the right attitude to have. Why does this matter? Because you come in too much swagger, you will be isolated. People will begin to ignore you and avoid you. And that's the fastest way to slow down your rate of learning. You want people to be willing to share with you what they know. You want them to feel like they're an expert. It's sort of a game that you're playing here. And as you're listening to people who are onboarding you, you need to always have that humble attitude of wanting to learn. It also signals that you're very unlikely to learn or adapt. And that just makes you stand out as someone who's not going to fit in, and people will begin to avoid you. What you need to do instead is you need to ask a lot of questions, with a keenness to try to understand. You're coming to an environment where people have been doing this stuff for decades, not necessarily the people who are working, but the technology and the approaches, they are decades older than yourself. And therefore, you may find things they may look nonsensical, they may look inefficient, but that's how the work environment looks like, and that's what you need to learn. If you want to improve things, try and improve things after you've learned what is in place already. Take notes, listen, don't offer fixes. Just because you know something from another place, maybe where you did an internship, give it time. Settle in first of all. Show initiative. It's always good to show initiative, but always check your assumptions. Ask questions in a way that convey that you're interested in learning, because that's very important. Offer ideas as suggestions, not declarations. And the one thing you should never do is never make this kind of mistake. You say, that's wrong. That's wrong. Again, that's just going to make you stand out and get into a lot of trouble. If you notice something that is amiss or doesn't work the way you expected it to, you say, hey, I noticed this. Can I share a thought? Do you think that it would make sense to do it this way? And it could be that what you have noticed, they have never noticed before. And that will make them mark you as someone who's got good ideas, has got a very sharp eye. But don't go in saying that's wrong, that'll never work, or being arrogant. So this is the second thing that I think very important. Don't act like you know everything. Be hungry to learn, be hungry to take notes and adapt to your working environment. I think that is really, really important. The third thing I think, which is really important that you should never do, is don't gossip or badmouth others. It may make you, develop a rapport with certain employees or certain teammates, but it's just a bad habit. It takes months to build trust. But if you say one careless comment, one thing out of place, you could get into a lot of trouble. And the interesting thing is, when you're getting into a new work environment, after they have taken you through the interview process and then selected you to be part of the team, they give you a blank slate of trust. They assume that they can trust you. And then they have to verify whether that's actually true. And therefore, you really have an advantage when you're fresh, because they don't know anything about you and they're giving you a chance to prove yourself. But the moment you prove, especially early on, the moment you prove that you badmouth others or that you talk about your superiors in a way that demeans them, that very quickly begins your descent. And it could be something as careless as, on a chat system, like on Slack or on Zoom or on email. You send out an email which is negative. You could send it to the wrong person. You could have a hot mic when you're on a Zoom call and you think that the mic is muted and you say something negative, and that just will send a chill down everyone's spine, and that's going to finish you very quickly. From then on, it'll just be downhill. So why does it matter? As I said, it may make it feel like you're getting to know other people and you're bonding with other employees. And you know what? Sometimes in some companies, they could have spies, people who deliberately try and test to see whether you will go down that route. But that's just a reputation. It's going to destroy your reputation, and you may never leave that bad reputation behind. People remember what you say, even in jest, even in, it seems like you're trying to be funny, but you crack a joke and it ends up really backfiring on you. And I remember this very early on in my first year of work. I remember a situation that happened to myself. Fortunately, it didn't turn out badly, but we had an event and we went together with a very senior executive, and we stopped somewhere for a snack, and I made a careless joke, and I just felt so awful after that. I just knew that I couldn't do that. I couldn't joke with a senior executive. And that it just put a cold chill down my spine, because I realized that I had become too comfortable and too relaxed. I thought that just because he could laugh and talk with us, I could say silly things like that. And I was fearing for my job. Now, in the end, nothing really happened. I think I may have walked up to him and apologized to him, And he was probably surprised, like, why are you apologizing? I've not even noticed anything. But I knew that I needed to change how I related to this senior executive. So it's really important. No gossip, no bad mouthing. Don't be too relaxed and say silly things because you could have spies. What should you do instead? If things aren't going well in your work environment, don't vent to your coworkers. Find someone outside of work who has absolutely no relationship with your work, whether it is, a partner, a spouse, a friend, a sibling, and talk to them about it. They can give you advice. If you have a mentor, talk to that mentor, and seek advice on what you need to do. But don't vent to your coworkers because, people could talk about you behind your back. People could run to senior management and tell them the kind of things that you're doing. If there's an official conflict, raise it constructively. Usually, there will be an official way to do things through HR. If a senior executive or a senior manager or a teammate is not treating you correctly, then there are proper channels to actually do that. So find an official way to do it or just let it go. There's no point of holding on to some of these things. Another really good tip to be aware of is always praise in public. If you're in a position where you have a teammate who does something wrong, correct them in private, never correct them in public. However much you're burning with pain inside, don't ever correct someone in public. So you praise in public, you say, so-and-so is doing a really good job. I'm really impressed with what you're doing. You need to teach me how to do that. I'd like to learn from you. But if someone does something that, maybe violates offends you, take them aside in private, just with them, so that you know that you didn't tell it to any third party. If it spread, it's because that person has done so, not because of yourself. So these are really important things to bear in mind. So just for you to reflect, who in your past environment, whether it was during your undergraduate or in your first job, became untrustworthy through talk alone? And I can think of a colleague. I had a colleague who, um, she was just so difficult to work with. Like, and she would, she would maybe go to HR or she'd talk about you behind your back. It was just impossible to know, like what side is she on? She'd look like she's very friendly with you, and then all of a sudden, she'd say something completely surprising, and that just destroys the rapport you can have as a team. And that's how you begin to see that, the quality of work really deteriorates. So just think about this, like who in your past environment became untrustworthy and why? What did they do? The fourth thing that I think you should never, ever do in your work environment is don't wait to be told everything. Don't wait to be told everything. Now, we talked about this last time, the first rule that you need to be proactive. But this also stands out if you have to be told everything, if you have to be instructed to do everything, you're hired to think. Then if you have to be told everything, then it means that you're really not the right person, or you're just going to stay in that position for a very long time. So you are hired to think for yourself, think on your feet, and ask questions. To ask how you can be part of a team. Why is this important? Why does it matter? Is because the big rewards that you get in your work environment come because of initiative, because of you taking the lead. And in fact, as you rise more and more in your job, as you get into more senior positions, you take maybe a senior engineer, a principal engineer, or you become a junior manager, a mid-level manager, senior manager, head of a team, or even a chief. Initiative really is the name of the game. And you are the one who drives things. And early on, you don't really have anything to drive, but you want to show that you can drive things forward and that you can take initiative. And if you're the kind of person who is very passive and you sit by and wait to be given work, then you're going to be ignored. You're going to be forgotten. If in a meeting you don't ask any questions or for clarifying questions, and later on you end up doing work amiss, you do the wrong thing, then people you develop that reputation that, this person can't get anything done. They have to be told everything. They have to be instructed to the point that they almost have to be micromanaged. And you don't want that. You want someone to trust you because you can take initiative. So what should you do instead? Well, when you're done with a task, you need to ask, what else can I help with? You need to be ready. You need to be available. You need to show those who you're working with, those who you're reporting to, that you are available to do work. It just develops a very good reputation for yourself. Offer to shadow someone or take notes in meetings. Do things. Be active. Don't just sit on the sidelines. Be active. And when people know that you're the kind of person who takes initiative, then you begin to get more and more responsibility. You begin to, people think about you as the first person to take responsibility for something that's new. And you never know. It may be that someone who's senior in your team will decide to leave, and that leaves a vacancy, and you're the obvious choice because you have proved yourself. So don't wait to be told everything. Really try and take initiative. Keep a running list of small ways to be useful. Like, be on the lookout for things that you can contribute to, things that you can support with, and you can contribute to your team. And the final thing, the fifth thing, and this is very counterintuitive, and I'll really try to emphasize this in relation to your experience so far, is don't ignore the culture. Don't ignore the culture. Don't think that you're just going to be yourself. You're joining an organization where they do things in a certain way. And it has certain rules which are invisible, in as much as they will be the staff rule book. They'll tell you how to dress. They'll tell you how to get there on time. They'll tell you all these rules that you need to abide by, but there will be invisible rules. There'll be invisible rules about, for example, how to structure your email. It's very rare that a company will tell you how to write email, how to structure your email. It's very rare that they're going to teach you how to organize meetings that you need to have. It's very rare that they're going to tell you things like don't eat at your desk, for example. Some companies don't want you to eat at your desk. There are certain rules, for example, about if you join a Zoom meeting, should you keep your camera on or off? Well, that you need to learn to read the room. So this is so important because every group has its own type of culture. And as you move between groups, even within the same company, you need to understand what the culture is. And you want to fit in a way that contributes, not to fit in a way that you're abusing company resources. Of course, those are the things which are no-nos. You don't want to do those things. But you don't want to assume that what was normal before you joined is going to be normal in your new environment. Now, why is this important for when you're fresh out of campus? Because for the last 4 or 5 years, the dominant culture that you've been following has been with students. You eat with students, you study with students, your bedroom is, with other students, and therefore you have student behavior. There are things that you laugh at, there are things that you ignore, but now you're in a working environment and you'll be working with people who have got 20 or 30 years of experience and they've worked in different companies. Some people have international experience where they've been working with professionals who do things at another level. And they have a certain expectation of you, how you're going to write your email, how you're going to speak in meetings, how you're going to, present yourself when you join a Zoom meeting, how you answer the phone. There are certain rules that you have to follow, and you want to learn those as fast as possible. Again, you don't want to stand out like you're an odd person in the culture. You have to learn to read the room. There's an interesting phrase. Reading the room means that before you bring out your personality, when let's say you're joining a meeting or you're attending an event or a seminar, whatever it is, pay attention to what you see around you. How are people dressed? How are they sitting? Do they have notebooks? Do they have their laptops with them? How are they dressed? So you need to be aware, pay a lot of attention, because you don't want to stand out as someone who's an oddball. You want to stand out as someone who's taking initiative and all those nice things, but at the same time, you want to fit in with the culture. That's such an important thing to do. So what should you do instead? Instead of ignoring the culture, you need to observe deeply. Look at the emails. How are they structured? What salutation do they use? Do they say hi, or do they say dear? Or do they say to all concerned? Or what is the words that they use? And I obviously wouldn't know this for all companies, but you want to make sure that you're in line with the way things are in your organization. How do people talk to one another? What do they talk about? Like, is it just you know talk which is no direction, or are they focused? Are there certain times when people take it easy, or are there certain times when people are very formal? What's the kind of tone that people use? How do they speak on the phone? How do they speak with business partners, with suppliers, with customers? What are the kind of things that do you need to learn all these things? Because you don't want to be rude to a customer on the phone. Um, I remember a very interesting thing that happened. It was an unfortunate situation. When I worked at one of the telecom companies, and I remember we we had this project, and the client was writing emails back and forth, and we received an email. A lot of people were copied on that email, and it took a long time. I think that it took a long time before the client got a reply. So I decided to reply. And my boss, a French guy, he came to me and he said, "Don't you ever do that again." And that really shocked me. And the thing that I did wrong there was that I ignored the protocol, that I didn't have the authority to make any decisions or to respond to that email. And he's the one who had to, and it was I think it was a very important thing that the client had asked about. And the reason for that is you can make promises on behalf of the company to the client that the company has not included in the contract. And you could put the company into a lot of trouble. So whenever you have a conversation between senior people, you want to let them have that conversation. They're just copying you for your information, for you to know what the progress is on that conversation. But it's not for you to decide. You can't make certain decisions. You don't have that authority. So you need to observe deeply, very important. Watch other people's behavior, how they keep time, how they dress, how they speak, very important. If you are ever in doubt, ask a trusted colleague. Is there anything I should know about how things are done here? Especially when you're new. Like, what time do people go for lunch? How long do they take out for lunch? How do people take personal calls, for example? Do they answer them in the office? Do they have to step out? How do they use the phones in the office? Can you use the phones for personal stuff? And typically, you wouldn't want to do that, even if you see other colleagues doing that. So don't ignore the culture. Very important. So here's a recap of the 5 don'ts. Number 1, we talked about don't mix company resources with personal use. Make sure there's a very clean separation between how you use the company resources and the expectations of the company around that with personal use. Don't act like you know everything. Be humble. Be ready to learn. Show people that you are the right person to be trusted with information. Don't gossip or badmouth others. It goes around, and eventually you'll have a reputation as a gossip, and you'll never be able to shake that off. Don't wait to be told everything. Take initiative, and don't ignore the cultures. If you pay attention to these 5 don'ts, then you are on solid foundation. And if you obviously take into account the 3 good behaviors we talked about last time, then that's what's going to take you very far. So now we're going to have another interaction. And what I'm going to do is, let me just set that up first of all. Give me 1 second as I unhide this slide and skip this slide. Okay. So just for 1 second. Okay, then. So let's go back to that. Should now have opened. So use a QR code. Okay. I think the next question is going to show up. If you do a refresh, that should now show up with another question. Let's see. Just scan the code. It'll now take you to the next question. So the next question on your screen will be, how would you rank the 5 no-nos from today's talk? How would you rank the 5 no-nos from today's talk? Now, You have 100 points there, and your job is to distribute these 100 points among these five. Which one would you give 30 or 20 or whatever? Just distribute them so that you can then rank them. Some of them will be the same rank, so they may have the same. Some of them will have a zero. For example, you're very clear that you're not going to mix company resources, or you don't do this with personal use, and that just ranks as a zero. But which one would you rank as the highest, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth? So I'll just give you 1 minute. This is all anonymous. There's no information collected from you here. So let's just fill this in. I'll give you a minute to do that, and then you submit. Once you're done, just submit that. Oh, cool. Very nice. Okay, what I'd love to do now is, I'd love to know, I'm going to let me just make sure anyone can talk. Let's just do this. So if you want to, any thoughts that you want to share, why did you give the rank the way you did? Why would you highlight the top one as the way you highlighted it? So anyone want to give an answer? Some thoughts? Hi there. Yeah, go on. I can't quite hear you very clearly. But you could type it in the chat. We'll still see it. Anyone else want to give their opinion? Why did you rank? So it seems like, don't act like you know everything and don't wait to be told. Those are ranking right at the top. Anyone with any opinions, any thoughts that they want to share? Okay, so if we don't have any of that, I think we are done. I think the only thing left is I'd like to let you know that the next session will be on the 15th of August. And in this talk, we'll be talking about the 5 work skills that no degree can replace. So if you want to learn about some key skills that no one has ever taught you about, but that are so important, well, you've probably been expected to use these skills, but you've never developed them. And that's what we'll be talking about. So the 5 skills that you can use the QR code on your screen to sign up for that event. And feel free to share it and invite anyone else. All these events are free, and it's free information. You can take it and apply it to yourself and learn. Or you can decide to ignore them and learn them by experience. I'm trying to provide a way that you can fast track your learning. So any questions before we close this session? Any questions any burning questions about the 5 no-nos? And I think maybe I can put them on the screen so that if you do have a question, let's just do the recap. Any questions about these 5 no-nos? Okay, so if there are no questions, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining this session. I hope it was useful. I hope you learned something new. And I hope this becomes instrumental in shaping your career in the right way. And I just want to wish you the best of luck, and take care. Okay, so bye everyone.